Tonight, we're continuing our book on animal magnetism. And as a reminder, this book is from 1844. It's written by William Lang, and it has a supplement by Reverend Chauncey Townshend. In part 1, the French scientists sounded pretty convinced that animal magnetism was a real phenomenon, and they thought it needed some more study. And if you've been following along, there's really no need for more introduction than that. We're on a roll, so we're just going to get right into it. Chapter 2. Various theories have been from time to time promulgated in explanation of the extraordinary phenomena of mesmerism. It was assumed by Mesmer that there was a reciprocal influence continually subsisting between the heavenly bodies, the earth, and animated nature through the medium of a certain very subtle fluid pervading the whole universe and capable of receiving, propagating, and communicating every impulse of motion. The properties of matter and of organized bodies, says Mesmer, depend upon this operative principle. The animal body experiences the alternative effects of this agent, which, by insinuating itself into the substance of the nerves, affects them immediately. The human body exhibits properties analogous to those of the magnet, such as polarity and inclination. The property of the animal body, which renders it susceptible of this influence, occasioned its denomination of animal magnetism. Mr. Colquhoun, after remarking that the profound and interesting researches of those eminent physiologists, Ryle, Auchinleck, and Humboldt, have gone far not only to demonstrate the existence of a nervous circulation, but even to render probable the external expansion of this circulating fluid, goes on to say, were we, then, to admit the existence of this nervous fluid, of its sensible atmosphere, and its analogy in other respects to electricity, it does not seem to be a very violent or unphilosophical hypothesis to presume that, in certain circumstances and under certain conditions, it may be capable of being directed outwards by the volition of one individual with such energy as to produce a peculiar effect upon the organization of another. This hypothesis, too, appears to be supported by the fact that individuals possessing sound health and great nervous energy operate, in general, most effectually in the magnetic treatment, and that weak and diseased persons are most susceptible of the magnetic influence and manifest the most extraordinary phenomena. Almost all the practitioners of animal magnetism, indeed, seem to agree in this, that the magnetic treatment operates principally, if not entirely, upon the nervous system, and particularly upon those nerves which are situated in the abdominal region. The decision of the French commissioners of 1784, which is generally supposed to have been utterly hostile to mesmerism, was in reality principally directed against Mesmer's theory of a fluid. The facts, or at least a numerous portion of them, were admitted, the theory being the main point of attack. The commissioners tell us, we follow the translation in Mr. Townshend's work, that which we have learned, or at least that which has been proved to us, in a clear and satisfactory manner by our inquiry into the phenomena of mesmerism, is that man can act upon man at all times and almost at will by striking his imagination, that signs and gestures, the most simple, may produce the most powerful effects, that the action of man upon the imagination may be reduced to an art, and conducted after a certain method when exercised upon patients who have faith in the proceedings. The French commissioners explained the whole phenomena by attributing them to the power of imagination. The celebrated Cuvier, who fully admits the truth of mesmerism, writes on this point, as quoted by Dr. Elliotson in his Human Physiology. We must confess that it is very difficult, in the experiments which have for their object the action which the nervous system of two different individuals can exercise one upon another, to distinguish the effect of the imagination of the individual upon whom the experiment is tried from the physical result produced by the person who acts for him. The effects, however, on persons ignorant of the agency, and upon individuals whom the operation itself has deprived of consciousness, and those which animals present do not permit us to doubt that the proximity of two animated bodies in certain positions, combined with certain movements, have a real effect, independently of all participation of the fancy. It appears also clearly that these effects arise from some nervous communication which is established between their nervous systems. In allusion to an investigation into mesmerism made by the well-known Gall, Dr. Elliotson remarks, "It being, however, impossible to deny such facts of mesmerism as occur in some nervous diseases, are they to be ascribed to mere imagination, an excitement of the feelings by the gesticulations and proximity of the manipulator, or to the operation of an unknown power? Gall admits this power, and even does not reject the hypothesis of its connection with the fluid. How often, in intoxication, hysterical and hypochondriacal attacks, convulsions, fever, and insanity, under violent emotions, after long fasting, through the effect of such poisons as opium, hemlock, belladonna, are we not, in some measure, transferred into perfectly different beings, for instance, into poets, actors, etc.? Just as in dreaming, the thoughts frequently have more delicacy, and the sensations are more acute, and we can hear and answer, just as, in ordinary somnambulism, we can rise, walk, see with our eyes open, touch with the hands, etc., so we allow that similar phenomena may take place in artificial somnambulism, and even in a higher degree. We acknowledge a fluid which has an especial affinity with the nervous system, which can emanate from an individual, pass into another, and accumulate in virtue of particular affinities more in certain parts than in others. We admit the existence of a fluid, the subtraction of which lessens and the accumulation augments the power of the nerves, which places one part of the nervous system in repose, and heightens the activity of another, which, therefore, may produce an artificial somnambulism. A rigid mathematician, Laplace, observes that of all the instruments which we can employ in order to enable us to discover the imperceptible agents of nature, the nerves are the most sensible, especially when their sensibility is exalted by particular causes. It is by means of them that we have discovered the slight electricity which is developed by the contact of two heterogeneous metals. The singular phenomena which result from the external sensibility of the nerves in particular individuals have given birth to various opinions relative to the existence of a new agent, which has been denominated animal magnetism, to the action of the common magnetism, to the influence of the sun and moon in some nervous affections, and lastly, to the impressions which may be experienced from the proximity of the metals or of a running water. It is natural to suppose that the action of these causes is very feeble, and that it may be easily disturbed by accidental circumstances, but because in some cases it has not been manifested at all, we are not to conclude it has no existence. We are so far from being acquainted with all the agents of nature and their different modes of action, that it would be quite unphilosophical to deny the existence of the phenomena merely because they are inexplicable in the present state of our knowledge. Dr. Elliotson gives his own opinion in these words: "I have no hesitation in declaring my conviction that the facts of mesmerism, which I admit, because they are not contrary to established morbid phenomena, result from a specific power. Even they are sometimes unreal and feigned, and, when real, are sometimes the result of emotion, of imagination, to use common language, but that they may be real and independent of all imagination, I have seen quite sufficient to convince me." And after giving the particulars of some cases, he thus proceeds: "These are the phenomena which I have witnessed. To ascribe them to emotion and fancy, to suppose collusion and deception, would be absurd. They must be ascribed to a peculiar power, to a power acting, as I have no doubt, constantly in all living things, vegetable and animal, but shown in a peculiar manner by the processes of mesmerism." These sentences appear in the second part of the Human Physiology, published in 1837, and Dr. Elliotson adds in the concluding part in 1840, I have now for 3 years carefully and dispassionately investigated the subject by experiments performed almost every day upon a variety of persons, and I not only repeat my firm conviction of the truth of mesmerism, but of the truth of many points in it upon which I formerly gave no opinion, because I had not then witnessed them, and was determined to remain neutral upon every point on which I myself did not witness facts. The production of the peculiar coma by mesmerism, independently of all mental impressions, is a truth now admitted by a very large number of the best informed, acutest, and least credulous men in England. The Reverend Chauncey Hare Townshend, in his Facts on Mesmerism, affirms that productive of the effects called mesmeric, there is an action of matter as distinct and specific as that of light, heat, electricity, or any other of the imponderable agents, as they are called, that when the mesmerizer influences his patient, he does this by a medium either known already in another guise or altogether new to our experience. A theory of a different description has been advanced by Mr. Braid in his Neuropnology. While attending as a skeptic in mesmerism the conversations of Monsieur Lafontaine, Mr. Braid's attention was arrested by the inability of a patient to open his eyelids. He says, in 2 days afterwards, I developed my views to my friend Captain Brown, as I had also previously done to 4 other friends, and in his presence and that of my family and another friend the same evening, I instituted a series of experiments to prove the correctness of my theory, namely, that the continued fixed stare by paralyzing nervous centers in the eyes and their appendages, and destroying the equilibrium of the nervous system, thus produced the phenomenon referred to. The experiments were varied so as to convince all present that they fully bore out the correctness of my theoretical views. My first object was to prove that the inability of the patient to open his eyes was caused by paralyzing the levator muscles of the eyelids through their continued action during the protracted fixed stare, and thus rendering it physically impossible for him to open them. With the view of proving this, I requested Mr. Walker, a young gentleman present, to sit down and maintain a fixed stare at the top of a wine bottle, placed so much above him as to produce a considerable strain on the eyes and eyelids, to enable him to maintain a steady view of the object. In 3 minutes his eyelids closed, a gush of tears ran down his cheeks, his head drooped, his face was slightly convulsed, he gave a groan, and instantly fell into profound sleep, the respiration becoming slow, deep, and sibilant, the right hand and arm being agitated by slight convulsive movements. This experiment not only proved what I expected, but also, by calling my attention to the spasmodic state of the muscles of the face and arm, the peculiar state of the respiration, and the condition of the mind as evinced on rousing the patient, tended to prove to my mind I had got a key to the solution of mesmerism. Mr. Braid goes on to detail experiments upon Mrs. Braid and some of his servants, and then proceeds. I now stated that I considered the experiments fully proved my theory, and expressed my entire conviction that the phenomena of mesmerism were to be accounted for on the principle of a derangement of the state of the cerebro-spinal centers, and of the circulatory and respiratory and muscular systems, induced, as I have explained, by a fixed stare, absolute repose of body, fixed attention, and suppressed respiration, concomitant with that fixity or attention. That the whole depended on the physical and psychical condition of the patient, arising from the causes referred to, and not at all on the volition or passes of the operator, throwing out a magnetic fluid, or exciting into activity some mystical universal fluid or medium. Such are the opinions entertained by some of the most eminent writers on mesmerism, and as we are almost daily receiving fresh knowledge on the subject, there need be no hurry in building up a theory. The phenomena of mesmerism are in themselves true, whatever theory may ultimately be adopted, and probably inquirers would for the present be most usefully employed in scrutinizing and recording facts, and leave the rest to time. Chapter 3. Attempts have been made by many writers to classify the states into which patients may pass while in the mesmeric sleep, but none of these classifications has ever met with general approbation. The phases of the mesmeric sleep vary in different individuals, and even in the same individuals at different times. The transition from one state into another is sometimes almost imperceptible. The boundaries between the different states are not easily ascertained, and the states themselves occasionally present some minute divergences, and are variously complicated. Hence the extreme difficulty of any exact classification. Mr. Colquhoun, in his Isis Revelata, has given the scheme of Cluj, which is divided into 6 classes, and the following is the abstract in a slightly altered form. First degree, which has been denominated that of waking, presents no very remarkable phenomena. The intellect and the senses still retain their usual powers and susceptibilities. Second degree, half-sleep, or the imperfect crisis. Most of the senses still remain in a state of activity, that of vision only being impaired, the eye withdrawing itself gradually from the power of the will. Third degree, the magnetic sleep. In this degree, the whole of the organs, through the medium of which our correspondence with the external world is carried on, the senses, refuse to perform their respective functions, and the patient is placed in that unconscious state of existence which is called the mesmeric sleep. Fourth degree, perfect crisis, or simple somnambulism. The patient in this degree awakes, as it were, within himself, and his consciousness returns. He is in a state which can neither be properly called sleeping nor waking, but which appears to be something between the two. He is placed in the very peculiar relation towards the external world, which will be better understood after a perusal of the cases in a subsequent part of the work. Fifth degree, lucidity, or lucid vision. In this degree, which in France has been denominated clairvoyance, and in Germany Hellsehen, the patient is placed in what is called the state of self-intuition. When in this situation, he is said to obtain a clear knowledge of his own internal mental and bodily state, is enabled to calculate with accuracy the phenomena of disease which will naturally and inevitably occur, and to determine what are their most appropriate and effectual remedies. He is also said to possess the same faculty of internal inspection with regard to other persons who have been placed in mesmeric connection, en rapport, with him. Sixth degree, universal lucidity. In this degree, the lucid vision which the patient possessed in the former degree becomes greatly increased and extends to objects whether near or at a distance. This exalted state of the faculties is said to be of comparatively very rare occurrence. Another classification has been adopted by Mr. Dove, and was explained by that gentleman in his lectures on mesmerism. In this series of states, the patient rises from the lowest, that of contemplative abstraction, until he at length reaches the highest, which has been termed devotional ecstasy. The following is Mr. Dove's classification. 9. Devotional ecstasy. 8. Lucid vigil. 7. Lucid reverie. 6. Lucid dreaming. 5. Oblivious sleep. 4. Ordinary dreaming. 3. Ordinary reverie. 2. Ordinary vigil. 1. Contemplative abstraction. Mr. Dove remarked upon the above classification in the following terms in his lectures. Thus, as observed by Mr. Townshend, mesmeric sleep-waking has its shades and gradations, varying from consciousness fully retained to its faintest twilight, or utter extinction. And thus also, as remarked by Mr. Colquhoun and others, no patient can reach the higher degrees of magnetism without having previously passed, however rapidly, through the lower. I have most carefully observed, and as far as possible distinguished, the various mental states arranged in their natural order as they must be passed through one after the other in all cases of entrancement. But it must not be thought that it is those states only here called lucid that occur in the process of mesmerization. Many, very many, never reach so far as the state of lucid reverie or even sleep at all. A vast majority, indeed, will be found not farther advanced than simply to a state of surface sleep, occupying continuously such a position in this natural order as that between ordinary vigilance and ordinary reverie, or that of reverie or continuous and involuntary absence of mind itself. A mere shade, as it were, being taken off the power and state of ordinary waking. Such a state every one of us must pass through or cross, however rapidly, on his daily way from vigilance to sleep, and on his daily return from sleep to vigilance. And all the difference between this state, in such circumstances, and in those of mesmerization, is that in the latter case, and in consequence of the mesmeric operation, it is steady and continuous for a time in spite of the will, while otherwise it is momentary and fleeting, the mind and body rather crossing its place than existing in it. But there is a preliminary stage to even these in mesmeric operations, a stage in which some patients linger for a longer or shorter time, a state of fixed abstraction, whether momentary or by continuance, a state in which the vigilant power of attention is roused to a deeper pitch of intensity than usual, even though the eyelids be closed and the body passive, a sort of ultra-vigilant contemplative state, in short, described by those who have experienced it as comparable to the drawing or bending of a bow before the arrow has been shot to the mark. And this, I have been assured by others, as well as by my own personal experience, is the state in which the reactive power of transfiguration is acquired. On pointing out this state to Sir William Hamilton in Edinburgh, he was much struck with it, and remarked to me that it reminded him very much of the primary effect of opium in producing a state of rapt and concentrative abstraction, afterwards followed by the reactive flow of brilliant, radiative imagination, so characteristic of the mental labors of the opium eater, a remark perhaps induced by his personal observation of its effects on Mr. De Quincey, the celebrated English opium eater, with whose own opinion, moreover, I am well aware it coincides. It is in the state of ordinary vigilance almost alone, or in states approximating to it, that there is sensibility in the flesh to pain. In some of the states evolved or arrested in the mesmeric operation, therefore, where the individual, of course, is not in ordinary vigilance, there is no such sensibility except through the body of another, who must be in ordinary vigilance, and who thus, therefore, actually stands to the mesmeric or entranced patient in the place of that very self-conscious, concentrative power of ordinary vigilance, which in himself is plunged in oblivion or absorbed in the radiative spirit of the trance. It is by the same species of simple induction, if we may so call it, that the entranced or radiative, in favorable or rare circumstances, appreciates tastes, sounds, smells, and even colors through such cooperation with the concentrative in another, in ordinary vigilance, as really exists between the concentrative and radiative in each of us, whether in ordinary vigilance or not. Other classifications have been formed, but it is unnecessary to enter upon these, sufficient having been given to indicate the general ideas which are entertained by the mesmerizers. The state of somnambulism, or of sleep-waking, as it has been more appropriately named, is one of natural occurrence in man, but we need not occupy space with the host of cases of that description which might be brought forward. Regarding this state, Mr. Townshend remarks, that the state of mesmeric sleep-waking is a rise in man's nature. No one who has been conversant with it can doubt. Separated from the usual action of the senses, the mind appears to gain juster notions, to have quite a new sense of spiritual things, and to be lifted nearer to the fountain of all good and of all truth. The great indication of this elevated state of feeling is a horror of falsehood, which I have found common to all sleep-wakers. Sincerity is their especial characteristic. They cannot feign or flatter. They seem to be taken out of common life, with all its heartless forms and plausible conventions. These remarks, although referred by Mr. Townshend to the state of sleep-waking, seem more especially applicable to that of clairvoyance. In the Chevalier Ramsay's Philosophical Principles, a work written in the early part of the last century, we find some curious glimpses of the truths which mesmerism seems destined to unfold. Let the reader, for example, compare the passage just quoted from the Reverend Mr. Townshend with the following from the work of the Chevalier Ramsay. God established that beautiful order of nature by which our mortal bodies are subjected to sleep, so that the most part of men pass a third part of their time in a state of inaction which suspends the augmentation and manifestation of moral evil in the bad, the sentiment of physical evil in the good, and repairs in all the forces of the body exhausted by labor. In a paradisiacal state, sleep, according to the primitive fathers, was voluntary and holy. It was a mystical, spiritual repose before God, wherein the mind, elevated by contemplation, retired into its intellectual nature, suspended for a time all commerce with sensible objects, and exerted the noblest functions of its angelic part. Sleep was not then, as now, a short interval of frenzy, wherein imagination is filled with all sorts of incongruous ideas, nor, as in some, a total insensibility, where the superior faculties remain in a kind of lethargy as well as the senses. The poet Wordsworth, too, seems to have pictured a similar state in the following lines. That serene and blessed mood, in which the affections gently lead us on, until the breath of this corporeal frame, and even the motion of our human blood, almost suspended, we are laid asleep in body and become a living soul, while, with an eye made quiet by the power of harmony and the deep power of joy, we see into the life of things. The state of clairvoyance presents phenomena which, as described by the mesmerizers, are of so wonderful a nature that we need not feel surprised at the widespread skepticism on the subject. Treviranus, the famous botanist, said, in reply to the questioning of Coleridge, "I have seen what I am certain I would not have believed on your telling, and in all reason, therefore, I can neither expect nor wish that you should believe on mine. So extravagant, indeed, do many of the accounts on record appear, that it would, we are convinced, tend materially, at least for a time, to the advancement of mesmerism as a practical and beneficial science were it possible that they could be forgotten. Believing, however, that this is impracticable, we have not considered it proper to suppress in our record of cases some extraordinary details regarding this state. The Reverend Mr. Townshend, in approaching this branch of the subject, seems to have fully appreciated the difficulties with which it is surrounded, and thus expresses himself. The mesmerizer witnesses the wonder, but does not feel it himself. The sleep-waker, who is the subject of it, seems incapable of analyzing his new sensations while they last, still more of remembering them when they are over. The state of mesmerism is to him as death. He cannot, when he awakes, reveal the mysteries of that great deep. His mesmeric feelings are to him as though they had never been, and less favored in this respect even than they who have beheld him in his unusual condition. He is forced to take his own actions upon trust, and to exercise his own faith, while he draws so largely upon the realizing faculty in others. It is manifest, then, that we cannot believe in the clairvoyance of sleep-wakers in the same manner that we believe and know that we ourselves see with our eyes. It is a fact which transcends our present understanding. To what end, then, it may be asked, should I state phenomena which will be believed by few and perfectly comprehended by none? Because many things that are mysteries are nevertheless profitable subjects of contemplation. Whatever is beyond our actual state of being is confessedly out of the pale of empirical knowledge. Yet shall we on that account banish the higher developments of nature from our thoughts, or even from our own scientific examination? Were all our ideas confined to that which we certainly know, the domain of our intellect would be limited indeed. Besides, by careful study we may always extend, though we cannot complete, our apprehension of things above us, and by discovering their analogy to things already known, bring them at least nearer to our experience. Clearly, then, Where there is so much room for progress, it is our duty to advance, remembering that the point where we should abandon enterprise has not yet been decided. Dr. Elliotson, one of the most skeptical among the mesmerizers of England, seems at length inclined to admit that such a state does really exist. In his Human Physiology, he records not only his failures in obtaining a practical knowledge of clairvoyance, but also the success of Mr. Wood, of whom Dr. Elliotson says that he can place the same reliance upon his honor as upon the coolness and force of his judgment. Mr. Wood's case, which is described at length in Dr. Elliotson's work, was seen at Antwerp in the presence of the Reverend Mr. Townshend, who acted as the mesmerizer. Dr. Elliotson, however, has never had a case of clairvoyance in his own experience, and his opinion, as given to a gentleman who some time ago visited him in London, was to the effect that while there is every reason to believe that such a condition does exist, yet that the patient in these cases appears to be so much infected with the disposition to deceive that as yet it is exceedingly difficult to say when, or upon what occasions, their statements are to be relied on. In a recent communication, in remarking upon this statement of Dr. Elliotson's, Mr. Dove says, Dr. Elliotson, while he candidly confesses that it has not occurred in his own experience, admits that there is every reason to believe that such a state as that of clairvoyance does exist. Cases of excursive imagination, reverie, or dreaming, however, appear to be familiar to him, and in respect to such cases it must be, since he has admittedly not seen clairvoyance itself, that the remark in question has been made that the patient in these cases appears to be so much infected with a disposition to deceive that as yet it is exceedingly difficult to say when or upon what occasion their statements are to be relied on. No reliance at all, in fact, ought to be placed on statements made by patients in such states, which cannot, with any propriety, be confounded with the state of clairvoyance, though frequently alternating with it, even in the best of cases, just as the dreaming state of the mind of an infant frequently alternates with its state of vigilance. But it does appear to me to be scarcely fair to say that the patient, even in such states of reverie, delirium, or dreaming, is infected with a disposition to deceive. On being tried, certainly he will find no difficulty in imagining himself possessed of, and will accordingly make unhesitating pretension to, all the rarer faculties of clairvoyance, but the only deception here is self-deception on his own part, and on the part of those who listen to, or believe for a moment in the existence of such faculties in such states. Nevertheless, besides this spirit of strong delusion, I believe that in certain states of reverie or delirium there does exist either a deliberate disposition to deceive, or an instinctive manifestation of cunning and a peculiar desire to astonish us with lying wonders, reminding one of the spirit of deception so vividly manifested in the insane. But such a disposition is certainly not characteristic of the lucid or ecstatic vigil, in which, on the contrary, we have a manifestation of the very spirit of truth itself. One general source of perplexity and erroneous inference in regard to the mesmeric phenomena I conceive to be the fact that states in themselves peculiarly different, and manifesting totally distinct symptoms, are often confounded together under the heterogeneous title of the mesmeric state. Such a title I find attached to a recent publication by Dr. Elliotson himself, and I fear we have the same source of erroneous inference manifested in the opinion which he has given in connection with the very remark which has called forth the present explanation, namely, that there can be no doubt that a similarity of symptoms attends every case wherever it may appear. So far from this being the case, though a few of the symptoms are manifested in common, it must have been seen, amongst nearly 100 cases in all, which I have of late, from first to last, brought under public notice in the city of Glasgow, that some patients manifest peculiar symptoms which do not appear at all in others. Mesmerizers in general, moreover, are in the habit of classifying the various states in the natural order of their occurrence as totally distinct states. Mr. Colhoun, in a letter with which we were lately favored, says in allusion to the same topic, "The state of clairvoyance is exceedingly rare, and when developed by the magnetic processes, appears to depend very much upon the particular temperament of the operator and the constitutional predisposition of the patient. The best and most interesting cases of the clairvoyant state are those which have occurred naturally, that is, without the employment of any artificial means. Of these, one of the most remarkable and the most authentic is that reported by the Baron de Strombeck, published in Germany in 1813 and subsequently translated into French. In England, the inferior magnetic states are frequently mistaken for the higher clairvoyance, which is a source of much error and skepticism. The alleged propensity to deception in somnambulists has been remarked by almost all the elementary writers, especially in the case of females, and it has been generally attributed to their vanity and love of display. I suspect it is owing, in a great measure, to the importunity of mismanagement of the operator, or of those en rapport with the patient. I believe it has never been known to occur in the highest state of clairvoyance, in which the faculties appear to be quite spiritualized. We cannot, however, be too cautious in putting questions to somnambulists or taxing their powers too much, as they may themselves be deceived and deceive others without intending it. The thoughts and wishes of the operator also have a great influence over his somnambulist. In all cases, we ought to endeavor to discriminate as accurately as possible the precise state in which the patient may happen to be, in order to ascertain what he is capable of doing with certainty. An anecdote is related of Colonel Gurwood, the editor of the Duke of Wellington's dispatches, in the substantial accuracy of which the utmost reliance may be placed. The colonel, when in Paris some time ago, was induced to visit a somnambulist boy with whom he had repeated conversations. Although the boy had never left France, he gave the most minute description of Colonel Gurwood's house, rooms, closets, and their contents in London, and also of the colonel's room in the Tower of London. The anecdote has, we understand, been narrated on the authority of Colonel Gurwood himself, and it may the more implicitly be relied upon from the fact of the colonel being not only a man of the strictest truth, but of great soberness of character. To those, however, who reject clairvoyance as belonging to the region of the impossible, we would say, do not, therefore, reject mesmerism as a whole. It may be that sanguine or credulous persons have occasionally placed an undue reliance upon the statements of sleep-wakers, but it does not therefore follow that mankind should be deprived of the benefits which mesmerism is capable of affording. The most experienced mesmerists tell us that the state of clairvoyance is of rare occurrence, and comparatively few consequently can be witnesses of the wonders it is alleged to unfold. It is different in regard to other states, and it would be folly to reject the benefits within our reach because of the supposed extravagances of some of the believers in mesmerism. In the worst view of the matter, clairvoyance is a harmless illusion, and leaving it for a time, let us turn to the consideration of mesmerism as a remedial agent, destined, we believe, to ameliorate in an important degree many of the ills which flesh is heir to. And I think we're going to stop it there tonight. I could keep going, but chapter 4 is quite long, and if I keep reading, we're going to be going well over an hour, and I'm trying to keep these to a reasonable length. I think an hour and a half is overkill. But I've been reading ahead a little bit, and chapter 4 gets a bit more exciting. He starts making a very passionate argument, and he gets a little heated. So, that's coming soon. We'll be looking forward to that. Bye for now. Tune in next time.